VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us today on Crosstalk. You know, the prophet Hosea wrote, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." We also certainly know from the book of Ezekiel about the watchman on the wall and the importance of that watchman being up there to alert the citizens when danger was approaching. And it was his responsibility as a watchman to sound forth the trumpet, to give the warning that danger was about. And certainly today, as we grow weary at times of bringing back certain issues over and over and over again, but just like that watchman on the wall, we believe it to be a responsibility that is upon us to allow you to be subject to the information that there is certainly cause for concern, cause for alarm, and that danger is lurking around us. It's our privilege to have with us today on Crosstalk Steve Crampton, the Vice President of Legal Affairs and General Counsel with Liberty Counsel. He has practiced constitutional and civil rights litigation since 1993. He has served as lead counsel in numerous cases, many of which have resulted in reported decisions in state and federal district and appellate courts. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today on Crosstalk.
It's my distinct pleasure to be with you, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to be taking a look specifically at the Department of Justice and just an amazing letter that came forth from them. But just before we do that, Steve, before getting to this main topic, we want to make our listeners aware of an important vote that's going on in the U.S. House of Representatives. It was originally scheduled for today, but in the last hour, we just learned it has been rescheduled for tomorrow. It is H.R. 3541. It's called the Pre-natal Non-discrimination Act, or PRENDA, P-R-E-N-D-A, H.R. 3541. And it is such that would put a ban on sex selection abortions. So comment on this, if you would, Steve.
Yes, I'd be glad to. As horrific as most of us find the practice of abortion to begin with, I think it's even more despicable when we allow couples to decide which child is given the right to live and which shall die based solely on the gender that's been given the child. So the bill is a reasonable measure to at least protect the unborn simply because they're born male or female, as the case may be. It is another sign of the times, I guess, Jim, that we find ourselves even discussing this, much less engaged in something of a controversy over whether it's a good thing to do or not. You know, you pit the woman's so-called right to terminate the abortion for any reason that she chooses against the right of that unborn. It seems to be a no-brainer, but here we are once again with an issue that touches abortion and just lights a firestorm.
In a synopsis here, folks, we understand this bill would make it an offense punishable by up to 5 years imprisonment to knowingly do any of the following four things. Number one, perform an abortion, knowing that such abortion is sought based on the sex or gender of the child. Two, use force or threat of force for the purpose of coercing a sex selection abortion. Number three, to solicit or accept funds to perform a sex selection abortion. Or four, to transport a woman in the United States or across state lines for that purpose. And Steve, it bewilders me why a group like Planned Parenthood, who would be so opposed to such legislation, if they're really concerned about women's rights as they claim, how can they stand behind a practice in which people will purposefully kill a baby for no other reason than she's a girl?
And, that really points it up, doesn't it, Jim? What they're about is not a matter of principle. It's about political power, ultimately. And so they just throw all consistency, all logic out the window, it seems to me. It is preposterous. When we consider this is not an issue that we have to kind of dream about or speculate about in the abstract. We've seen it played out in the likes of China. What are the numbers? Something like 90% of the female female children who are conceived end up dying on the butcher's table because they simply didn't come out with the right chromosomes. It is just so mind-boggling that we as a nation, claiming freedom, claiming to be a nation under God, find ourselves with this even being an issue.
And folks, keep in mind that just over the weekend, too, it's gone viral now over the internet, Live Action went and did an undercover investigation into a Planned Parenthood clinic, posing for such a situation as a sex selection abortion, and Planned Parenthood was right there backing up the client in promoting them, saying, we hope you get your boy. If not, we can take care of this for you here. And even how they can go and apply for Medicaid to have an ultrasound to find out whether it's boy or girl, and then go ahead and kill the life of the baby. It's despicable. But folks, this bill, H.R. 3541, again, it's called the Pre-natal Non-discrimination Act, that would ban sex selection abortions, up for a vote tomorrow in the U.S. House. You can contact your congressman at 202-225-3121. That's 202-225-3121 regarding this piece of legislation that would place a ban on sex selection abortions. Well, Steve, that was not our main topic today, but because of its imminence, wanted to bring it forth. But
sure.
There's really an amazing story that broke just as we were approaching the Memorial Day weekend that involves Barack Obama's Department of Justice and the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. Tell us the story.
Well, what we have here is a case in which the Department of Justice has engaged in strong-arm, one might even say bullying tactics, against the university to force it to allow a man who, as they say, self-identifies, who is somehow confused about whether he's a man or a woman, to use the women's restroom. So even, university systems are not generally known for staunch conservatism. Mm-hmm. But here is the University of Arkansas actually trying to do the right thing by most Americans, and certainly the right thing by women who are put upon when a man walks in to use their restroom. And yet now you've got the power of the United States government brought to bear against the university to force this man to be allowed to use the women's restroom.
Now, we understand this is one who has changed his name. He now goes by the name of Jennifer Braley. He is a male, even though has now the name of Jennifer Braley, and desires to become a woman, but we understand that the university had even provided like a unisex bathroom for this person? That's
correct. Not good enough.
Not good enough. And so Jennifer Braley then went to the DOJ?
Right. I mean, this is what you've got here, Jim, is the use of the legal system and the power of the Department of Justice. This is an enormous, the most powerful legal institution in the world, now coming to this man's aid and bringing a heavy stick to bear against the university and, in effect, forcing them to allow this man to do what no one in his right mind would ever dream of allowing him to do. So you have, in the name of sensitivity and compassion, I think that's what they would say in their best light, come to help this man be sensitive to his needs, as it were. But look at how insensitive that means they are to the women, and how about children, little girls that must go into this women's restroom unknowingly encountering a man there right in the midst of their most private location. So we're not really, at the end of the day, helping this man. He is confused, apparently. But not only are we not helping him, I think at the same time we're affirmatively harming all of society by pretending to play along with this man's delusion.
Well, we keep hearing about conservatives being charged with launching a war on women.
Yes.
But isn't this promoting policies like this really the kind of policies that the DOJ is putting down? Isn't that really putting a war on women, putting women at risk?
I think you're exactly right. I think if you took a poll right now of the women in the university system that are actually required to use these restrooms, if they're going to use any of them on campus, the overwhelming majority would be against this kind of policy. And so, it's not about women's rights. It is, I think, about attempting to destroy the distinctions that God himself has built into mankind. Male and female, he created us. It's a very interesting comparison, isn't it, with the story we just covered with regard to the Pre-natal Non-discrimination Act.
Yeah.
You've got a desperate effort by the world, by those who really hate God ultimately, to try to do away with the very things that, for all our technological advances, we really can't change. Even if this man is successful in his sex change operation, his basic chromosomal structure will not change.
He's still male.
He is a man.
Yeah. Where does the Department of Justice get its authority to issue such a mandate on the university?
Well, it is, sadly enough, something that is built into our system. I mean, you've got this so-called Civil Rights Division, and this man files a complaint and goes through the channels that have been used historically for the right reasons. When Christians are put upon, that's where Christians would go to complain. Sadly, we have lost our way to such an extent that we now don't really know what is genuinely a civil right and what isn't. And so they just toss the term around, and this man supposedly has a civil right to engage in this transgender confusion.
Do we know the exact content of this letter that the DOJ sent?
I do not have that in hand. I expect it would be readily obtainable, but we may have to go through several motions to get it, and FOIA requests.
On this issue here, doesn't this really create a dangerous precedent? I mean, won't this create a domino effect at other universities?
No question about it, Jim. I mean, that's the problem. You've got the federal government, and, here we are. Even the left agrees with us that there are limits to how far the government ought to be allowed to go. We all, I think, are outraged at the likes of Google, although that's a private entity, invading our privacy by taking all this private information. We are up in arms about the Transportation Security Administration and their invasions of privacy when they go through their pat-down searches and so forth. And yet, when it comes to these kinds of issues, it seems that, again, all their logic and the principled positions they've taken before are out the window. They're all for use of government power and authority to force even private universities, this is a state university, but we'll see it at private universities soon, to do just this. That's right. You cannot limit it to just the University of Arkansas. There's nothing unique about that university compared to any other in any state in our nation.
Well, even though the university has not released the letter and DOJ has not released the letter as of yet, evidently the language was strong enough in this letter that caused the attorneys for the university to say, hey, we've got to not force this unisex restroom, but instead we must give this man access to the women's restroom.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of, it's ironic to me because we are in this age experiencing an unprecedented, you might say, war on bullying, right, in the public schools and elsewhere. It dominates the media stories and so forth. And yet you turn around. Let's put the same anti-bullying glasses on in this context that we try to put on in the context of public schools. Isn't this really bullying by the federal government?
Steve Crampton is our guest here today on Crosstalk. We're going to take a quick minute break and be back with further discussion. Yes, folks, the Department of Justice issuing a letter to university, and the outcome is that a man is given freedom to go use the women's restroom. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation debater with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, have insects always been insects? I mean, has there ever been any change?
Chris, I don't necessarily agree with the ages that evolution places on things, but you might be surprised how little insects have changed over time in their model. Recently, the fossil of a long-legged spider, identical to the modern-day one, was found precisely preserved in amber. It was thought to be 100 million years old. Scientists were wondering how this fragile little creature could remain unchanged while the dinosaurs went extinct due to a major catastrophe about 65 million years ago. How did these tender little things survive? No evolution in 100 million years? Well, I think there was no evolution ever. Creation, now that fits the biblical and scientific facts. That's the back to Genesis creation.
For more on creation, visit our website at www.icr.org.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the Department of Justice, the DOJ, forcing a pro-homosexual agenda. Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel said, quote, "Our United States Attorney General has crossed a critical line in forcing the pro-homosexual agenda down America's throat. Now, according to the Department of Justice, our laws and culture must facilitate the delusion of a person who deems themselves to be something they clearly are not." We're talking today with Steve Crampton, Vice President of Legal Affairs and General Counsel with Liberty Counsel, on this very issue. And, Steve, I think Matt Staver put it quite aptly there here. It's, when we have a person who deems themselves to be something that they're not, and we have to do with whatever they deem themselves to be, it clearly puts us at risk.
It really does. And it just sort of, the phrase is used a lot, but I think it's appropriate here. It opens a whole Pandora's box. Where does it end? Law is about limits. And incidentally, I'm reminded also of how often it's been thrown at us, well, you just can't legislate morality. Are we not legislating morality here by forcing on the University of Arkansas the so-called right of this confused man to come in and use the women's restroom? Where does it end? I mean, you and I were talking during the break. If I, quote, self-identify as the President of the United States, am I then entitled to access to the Oval Office? Can I go stay the night in the White House because that's who I think I am? There's just no end. And logically speaking, why is it right for a transgendered man, so-called, to have this kind of right? What if one day I just have a wild hair and, I haven't been going through the classes, don't really have plans to do a sex change operation, but one morning I self-identify as a woman. Can I then go in too? How about you? Why is he allowed and I'm not then? Again, where does it end? You have perverts roving the streets. They're going to seek access to places they shouldn't be under these kinds of rules and silly laws.
I understand that the Department of Justice has been doing some backpedaling on this issue now, saying, oh, no, we didn't say that. Any idea what's going on there?
It's I'm sorry to laugh, but it's amusing insofar as they don't seem to anticipate the depth of the public outrage in matters like this. I think there's little question, and I do reserve some judgment because I haven't seen the actual letters themselves, but I do not doubt that this is exactly what they intended. What they did not anticipate is that they would perhaps receive a black eye for it. I think it's all media spin.
By the way, folks, if you'd like to contact the Department of Justice, the letters have not been released as of yet, but it was such, whatever they wrote, it was such that the attorneys for the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith said, we've got to make a change here. We cannot allow them to just use a unisex restroom. We have to allow this male who believes he's a female actual access into the women's restroom. If you'd like to contact the Department of Justice, I have a number, a comment line, as well as a main number. Their main number switchboard is 202-514-2000. 202-514-2000. And their comment line is 202-353-1555. That's 202-353-1555. Steve, many may not know this, but I saw today that there is an official web presence for LGBT employees of the U.S. Department of Justice and their allies. They have a logo that features Lady Justice holding the scales, and it says DOJ Pride. The colors of the rainbow encircle Lady Justice. And they're promoting the fact that this coming Wednesday, June the 6th, they're sponsoring their annual Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Pride Month in the Great Hall of the Robert F. Kennedy Building. The theme for this year's program is quote, The Power of Out, end of quote, featuring guest speaker Chai Feldblum, commissioner of the EEOC, and they purport that there's going to be remarks from DOJ senior leadership. In light of what we're seeing, these actions with the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith, should it come to us at any surprise that this DOJ is so active in their LGBT promotion?
It shouldn't, and yet I must confess I'm a bit taken aback myself, and maybe you were as well, Jim.
I was.
We shouldn't be surprised, and yet we are repeatedly, are we not reminded of the age-old truism that ideas certainly have consequences. And when we put into office a man who has come out and openly embraced same-sex marriage as, again, a civil right, we should not be surprised that his Department of Justice is really not about neutrality. This is about the promotion and furthering of a particular agenda, an agenda, by the way, that I think is wholly inconsistent with and perhaps downright contradictory to the foundational principles on which our nation was built. It is dead set against Christianity and all that America has stood for over the ages. We have seen in our own practice in dealing with this Department of Justice a radical bent as well in the likes of, we recently litigated this FACE case, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act case, where Eric Holder himself was the named plaintiff against our client, Susan Pine, in West Palm Beach, Florida. Susan's been out there for over 20 years doing exactly what she always does. She prays. She tries to counsel with women who are going in to have an abortion. She is conscientiously obeying every little jot and tittle of the law. And yet, Attorney General Holder, apparently in political payback for the support of Planned Parenthood and others, brought the power of the federal government to bear again, and a preposterous claim that Susan had violated this federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act law simply by stopping to talk to a car that had rolled down its window to ask her some follow-up questions. We won that case hands down. The federal judge even questioned whether there wasn't something of a conspiracy between the Department of Justice and the private clinic ownership to go after pro-lifers here and interfere with their First Amendment rights. But this is the kind, personnel is policy, as they say. These are the people that are now inhabiting the Department of Justice and wielding the sword, as it were, through these lawsuits and threats like they did at the University of Arkansas.
Steve, sadly, we're seeing such a push for these so-called gender non-discrimination policies.
Yes.
They're cropping up all across the country. The state of Kansas is being bombarded right now, most recently in Salina, Kansas, with continued efforts going on in other Kansas communities right now that really, really is pushing this agenda, whether it be, I think it was Hutchinson, Kansas, too, where they talked about even giving full access to the pool, shower rooms, and changing facilities.
Correct.
It is bizarre, but this is where we're at today, and if we don't wake up to it, we're going to be one sorry state.
And Jim, I think these are stories that, as hard as they are sometimes to hear, the American people need to know, because it really isn't about equality, is it?
No.
A lot of folks want to go to sleep on this issue, don't want to discuss the homosexual agenda, want to say, let's just leave them alone. After all, they're not hurting anyone. But this is where it leads. Inevitably, once they seize power, they are ruthless in wielding it. And Hutchinson, Kansas is one that I think is a particularly poignant example of the fact that, our First Amendment, very first freedoms, protect religion. And yet we are at a day in our nation where the so-called non-discrimination acts and the misnomer of equality movements like this really are intended to and do completely steamroll religious freedom. There are no exceptions in the Hutchinson ordinance that is being seriously considered. And worse than that, when the individual citizens who dare oppose the agenda speak out, many signed a petition to oppose this gender identity ordinance. Guess what? They found their full names and contact information published on the Internet. By whom? It wasn't even the leftists that were pushing this agenda. It's by the local newspaper. So all privacy rights, again, are off for conservatives and for citizens who dare oppose this agenda. And, they're put up on a website for one primary reason. Back to the bullying again, for intimidation and for ostracizing in order to try to shame them into coming around, or at least sending a warning to everyone else. You dare not stand up against us.
And sadly, this whole issue of LGBT promotion, gay pride, it's not only funneling down from the White House, the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, but also now from corporate America, we're seeing a push like never before. We've seen JCPenney take the plunge with Ellen DeGeneres as her spokesman. They also, in their May publication, actually have two women who they describe as partners embracing the arms around one another, wearing wedding bands. And now Target stores has come out. Here is from LifeSiteNews.com. And Target has announced that they're going to be funding an organization dedicated to same-sex marriage. Target has announced it will make a donation up to $120,000 to the Family Equality Council, a homosexual political advocacy group. In the month of June, the chain of stores is donating the proceeds from online sales of a special collection of shirts. This special sales going to this organization. And I'm looking at some of the shirts here as they have. These are all Pride T-shirts that they have. And things like they have Pride men's shirts and women's shirts, Harmony and the rainbow colors, all kinds of gay Pride events. But Steve actually going to use the sales now, taking their corporate image to say, hey, we're going to stand with our finances to support this advocacy group that promotes homosexual policies.
It truly is mind-boggling, isn't it? Imagine, if you will, that the same store had done something like that for a Christian ministry. Suppose a ministry for the homeless or something that happened to have some Christian overtones or the name Jesus Christ in its title. They would never dream of doing such a thing for fear of backlash from the left. Apparently, there is no fear in corporate America that Christian Americans, conservatives, will stand up and say, we're not going to do any business with Target anymore. We've had enough. The other thing about this, Jim, that I think is quite telling, back to the bullying theme. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but you may recall that Target took a stand that opposed the homosexual agenda recently and received such a backlash, such an outpouring of outrage from the homosexualists that they not only did an about-face on the affirmative promotion of something that the homosexuals opposed, but they've gone so far as to implement this policy and, to the tune of $120,000, support the gay agenda. Surely most Americans do not agree with that sort of thing. But are we so complacent and so lackadaisical about what's important to us today that it's not going to matter in our shopping habits, in our reaching out and actually standing up for what's right and what's wrong today? I think, the jury's still out on that one, as it were.
Folks, there's a big logo on here, and I'm looking at it. Wear it with Pride, June National Pride Month. For each Pride item sold, Target will donate 100% of the purchase price to the Family Equality Council. We are just seconds away from a break, and folks, I'd like you to get ready with a sheet of paper, a pen, or a pencil, because when we come back from this break, I'd like to give you the toll-free number, the point of contact for Target stores, Target Corporation, based in Minneapolis, and as well as an email address where you can let them know your views on this very issue. We're talking today with Steve Crampton from the Liberty Counsel, and in just a few minutes, too, we'll give you opportunity to call in and participate in our discussion. You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America, as we are seeing today and through the course of the last several days, the U.S. Department of Justice forcing a pro-homosexual and LGBT agenda now upon universities as well. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Israel is constantly in today's news. Did you know that Israel stretches only 263 miles from north to south, and its width ranges from 71 miles at its widest point to only 9 miles at its narrowest point? Yet a growing number of nations continue to denounce the existence of Israel. In the book Israel Under Fire, authors Jimmy DeYoung and John Ankerberg review the Bible prophecies concerning Israel's future, the nations that will come against Israel, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and if peace will ever be achieved in the Middle East. The book also reports on plans now underway for rebuilding the Jewish temple on the Temple Mount and guides the reader through the book of Revelation. Israel Under Fire shows just how important it is to know what the Bible says about Israel's future and why it matters to you. Israel Under Fire is available for a donation of $17 to VCY America and can be obtained by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
Yeah, folks, it's happening. Target stores catering to families has now decided to fund an organization dedicated to same-sex marriage. They're making a donation worth up to $120,000 to the Family Equality Council, reports LifeSiteNews.com, a homosexual political advocacy group. During the month of June, they're donating proceeds from their online sales, of a special collection of shirts that all are focused on gay pride. If you would like to contact Target with your thoughts on this issue, not only can you contact your local Target store, but corporately you can contact the chairman of Target, Greg Steinhoffel, and their toll-free number is 1-800-440-0680. That's 1-800-440-0680, or dial direct at area code 612-304-6073, 612-304-6073, and you can let them know your thoughts on the issue. If you want to send an email, you can email them at guest.relations@target.com. That's guest.relations@target.com. Well, folks, I'd like to open our phone lines today to give you an opportunity to speak with our guest today, Steve Crampton from the Liberty Counsel. He's Vice President of Legal Affairs and General Counsel. Let's get your comments about the Department of Justice and their letter to the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. Maybe you have comments on Target. Maybe you have comments about the push for the so-called gender non-discrimination policies that are cropping up in communities across the country, especially in the state of Kansas. Our number is 1-800-733-9829. Your reaction to these issues today. Are you concerned that Target has gone this direction? We've seen JCPenney launch the way, now Target following in their footsteps. Does that bother you? What about the Department of Justice telling the university, though we don't have the letter released, the university found it was in their best interest based upon this threat, of perhaps further action from the DOJ that they better make some changes. Our number 800-733-9829. Before we get to the call, Steve, give us a word about Liberty Counsel and some of the matters that you're involved with there.
Well, thanks very much. We're available at lc.org, and we are engaged nationwide on both the educational front as well as the litigation front. We, as I mentioned, fight cases against the Department of Justice. We fight against the ACLU, school prayer, Ten Commandments cases. We do cases on behalf of Christian employees. As you all know, you've been very good to get the word out for us. We have an inordinate presence in the state of Wisconsin, I'm afraid. But, there's plenty to do, and we're just grateful to be able to do it. And I think, too, Jim, I just want to tip my hat to you all for handling some of these, as I say, kind of distasteful issues because, as the homosexuals in particular gain power and are successful in their efforts to have groups as large as Target and JCPenney kind of turn around and toe the line for them. So political parties become less and less willing to discuss these kinds of issues. They don't want the backlash either. And so if word doesn't get out on stations like yours, we may never hear it.
Let's go to our phone lines. Our first caller is Jean. Go ahead, Jean. You're on the air.
Yes, I have always wondered why we have why there are multiple toilet rooms in any public place. Our local library has two bathrooms a few feet apart. that have single toilets, and one is designated for men, one for women. But I say let's have small rooms, one toilet, one person, or parent and child or something like that, and away with all these multiple toilet rooms. I don't like them anytime.
You know, if I may say, Jim, I mean, it's a fair question, but I'm afraid just by virtue of the size of some of our facilities, and of course there are now federal health regulations that require so many stalls, as it were, depending on your expected capacity of your building and such, that I think it would be cost prohibitive for most businesses to just install the singles, as it were. So it's a reality we're going to have to deal with, and you know, I think absent everybody constructing at least a unisex room to where those of us who don't want to be in the women's room when the male is there can go. If he insists on going into the multiple stall one, maybe we can just start using the individual stall one. I don't know what the solution would be.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, even though the university had accommodated by having these unisex bathrooms in certain buildings here on campus, yet that wasn't good enough.
And that's what I think really disturbs me and makes me think that this confused man, Lord knows he needs our prayer, is about more of an agenda than he is really about any kind of privacy or anything. I mean, he wanted to be where other women were, right?
Yeah.
How else do you explain it?
Let's go next to Edie in Burlington. You're on the air, Edie.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention I was just recently reading passage in Isaiah chapter 3. And it reads like this, starting at verse 8. It says, Jerusalem staggers, Judah is falling. Their words and deeds are against the Lord, defying his glorious presence. The look on their faces testifies against them. They parade their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them. They have brought disaster upon themselves. Tell the righteous it will be well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked. Disaster is upon them. They will be paid back for what their hands have done. The whole passage is talking about a time like we live in. We cannot not stand against it. I not only don't find it funny, I find myself weeping every day for what's happening in this country. We need to go to the Lord in prayer and repentance, not just for ourselves, but for the nation.
Yeah.
We can confess and repent on behalf of the nation. We need to do it. We need to get serious. Sackcloth and ashes. I mean, that's where it's at.
Thank you, Edie, for bringing that point forward, and how critically, Steve, we need to be in prayer for our nation.
Amen to that. God bless you, Edie. And, you know, I think that really says very well that what America needs is not better laws, not a better president so much as a return to God. We are in a spiritual and moral freefall. And, you know, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is not, there is no liberty. We are losing our liberties, and it is just a symptom of the root problem, which is that we have lost our way with God.
Judy, you're our next caller. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I will be making those phone calls. And as the lady said, and then this gentleman, we already have laws on the books for things such as murder. I don't understand why our government doesn't see us. Well, we have a Congress that's impotent, but that there should be just plain arrests, for example, for people who murder babies. And as far as the homosexual, we have several stores that are going that direction, and the whole idea is a disintegration of our nation and our world.
Yes.
And when I'm speaking here in this senior house where I live, the people can't hear me. They don't even know where I'm coming from. I'm praying to the Lord for what I can do, and like that lady, I cry every day and pray that the Lord will help me to figure out what my part can be.
Yeah.
And God bless you for all your efforts, and God bless VCY.
Thank you, Judy. Appreciate your call here today as well. Our number, 800-733-9829. Jerry, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, say if 2 or 3% of the American public is homosexual, how in the world do they have so much power that JCPenney, that target listens to 2 and 3% and puts so much priority on that small percentage when 98% or more or less, 95 maybe shop there that would be opposed to this, or 90%. I mean, I don't know what the percentage of America is considered Christian, but I believe it's around 90%. And if all of these 90% of the people would get down and pray like the last two women, and we would act, this would be a non-issue.
Any thoughts, Steve?
Yes, what a great point. And by the way, I appreciate his statistics too. I believe those are the most accurate figures, even by homosexual researchers themselves. You know, the oft-used phrase of Edmund Burke, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I'm afraid in the end, the buck stops with us, does it not? We know better as believers, and we have condoned by our inaction the takeover of our institutions and of our political power as well. And so, as has been said here, Jerry and Judy and others, it is high time, it is beyond time for believers to get on our knees and take it back. There is what Scripture says is a natural enmity between the world and God and the church, and that enmity is playing itself out now. Christians and true religion is identified as an enemy of the state. They are not out there to gain equality. They're out there to do away with the church. And it is the church's obligation to stand up and to cry out to God and turn from our own wicked ways and ask God to heal our land.
Thank you, Jerry. And keep in mind that the title Christian is more than a label. It is a relationship with Jesus Christ, of which so many are lacking across this nation. And certainly it is one that responds in obedience to the principles of God's Word. Let's go to Navarre, Florida. And Rick, you're on the air. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Earlier in the program, it was mentioned that there's now a bill coming up for a House vote that would make illegal in some way the use of abortion as a means of sex selection, in effect.
Yes.
What a horrible and disgusting use of the medical arts that is. But one thing that must be borne in mind here is that just because this bill is coming up for a vote tells us more than what's going to happen in the vote, really, because Speaker Boehner on the Republican side, right, he could have let this bill go through the normal committee process, be voted on and out of committee and brought to the floor where a majority vote would have carried it. But no, by suspending the rules, which is what they're doing, this is a House procedure where you can bring something to the floor quickly without going through committee. He has spared an issue of contention with the Democrats, and plus given the illusion of action by bringing this thing to the floor when he knows there's no chance it's going to pass. There is no way that the 40 or 50 or 60 Democrats that will be needed to pass this thing are going to do it.
You're right. It's a two-thirds vote that they would need to use in order to have the suspension of the rules.
And if I may quickly continue for just a moment, this is proof yet again of what an accommodationist, and dare I say the word rhino, Speaker Boehner is, and we need to change the leadership in the House and put a lot of pressure on these guys. No more of these fake votes.
Rick, appreciate your observations in that regard, and it indeed is suspension of the rules to see this go forth. Let's go next to, we're seconds away here. Let's try Stephen and Nina. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, on the gay issue. Has anybody argued against homosexuality from the health standpoint? We've managed to demonize cigarettes because it causes cancer and alcohol because of the health issues with that. I was just curious, why is the argument out there that this homosexual lifestyle is unhealthy and therefore it should not be encouraged or promoted?
Steve, you bring up a good point, and we'll have our guests respond to that on the other side of the break. It's an excellent issue that you brought up here, and very apropos. We'll be back in just 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk here on the VCY American Network. Our guest today is Steve Crampton from Liberty Counsel. Their website, lc.org, and 800-671-1776. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Number 10, of our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers. Number 10 is false teachers are flippant in their attitude in dealing with demons. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 11-12 deals with this very clearly, speaks of these false teachers as being presumptuous and self-willed, that they're not afraid to speak evil against dignitaries, fallen angels. Whereas angels, it says, who are greater in power and might, do not bring a reviling accusation against them before the Lord. Jude 8 speaks of this same thing. Likewise, also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries, fallen angels. In other words, Christians are not to rail against demons. There's nowhere in the Scripture we're called to bind Satan or demons. What we find is James chapter 4, verse 7, submit to God, which means to line up behind God and His authority, and then resist or take your stand behind God. So stay in the Word, line up behind God, and submit to God. That's our response.
You know, it just doesn't make sense. As the caller pointed out, hey, we put all these rules and laws and disclaimers on packs of cigarettes and alcohol and all these issues, but what about homosexuality? What about its impact upon health? We have the First Lady who's out making sure we don't sell soda and potato chips, in our schools. But what about this, Steve, in which we are actually seeing a shortened life expectancy by those who are practicing the very lifestyle that the Department of Justice is promoting?
Again, an excellent point from the caller. The data is in. Even the homosexuals' own researchers, the CDC, the federal government, all confirm what we have long known. Homosexuality may be the most dangerous lifestyle out there with respect to their own people. This is virtually a suicidal undertaking, and their risky behavior increases year after year, despite all the educational efforts and attempts to distribute condoms and so forth. And in response to the question, what about that argument, rest assured, we make that argument regularly. Sadly, there is a blindness both on the part of the homosexuals themselves and, frankly, on the part of the courts for the most part. It is just too hot a potato for the courts to take under these circumstances. So the argument has not proven all that successful. But as you point out, Jim, I mean, the double standard is just stark and startling in its application here, isn't it? Cigarette smoke, the sodas at the schools, you can't pass out candy in certain schools and so forth. And yet they just want to say, come on down for this homosexual lifestyle.
Fort Scott, Kansas. Jerry, thank you for calling. You're on the air.
Yes, it's Gary. I'm sorry. Thank you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to talk radio a lot. And I listen to kind of the same thing, where people are saying, why is this and why is this? And I am so disappointed with the American public, because no matter whether it's a special interest group, a lobbyist, a president, a politician, it doesn't make any difference. It's because the vast majority of the people in this country want to put their head in a hole and don't want to become involved. You cannot convince me that Target and Penny's and Best Buy and some of those companies will do away with 97% of their clientele to appease 3%. Well, the truth is that when they appease the 3%, the 97% just turn their heads. If the people of this country got involved, none of this would be going on. Fairness, this country, in God we trust, and my wife and I pray for this country every night. But fairness is one thing, but all of these backdoor deals that are done in Washington and all this lobbyists where we appease these people are only done because the American public, the majority of the American public, the hundreds of millions of Christians out there, allow it to happen and don't raise their voices. Mm-hmm. And because the politicians are only going to do, maybe you have an exception or two, but they're in there to be reelected. And when their constituency says, no, you're not going to do that, and we're going to send you home, then they're going to listen to us. And everything that I can think of in this country that's going on politically can be solved with simply the American public, the vast majority of everybody that's listening to this show and listens to everything that's going on that pays any attention at all, if we rise up and say, no, we're not going to have that, it's not going to happen.
Right.
God bless you, Gary. I appreciate you bringing that forth and that challenge, certainly, of being involved. And so you're right. So often we put our head in the sand. It doesn't exist. It doesn't impact me right now, so I'm not going to get involved with it. And even though it violates my Christian principles, well, I guess we'll tolerate that.
Yeah.
Well, like you've said, once you give an inch, I mean, the old saying, you give an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah.
So so we have a certain amount of fairness. We want to be Christians. We want to say, well, okay, you have a lifestyle, and we're not going to burn you to the bush. But at the same point, now what are they doing? How far do they take it? They always keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And we're only talking about 3%, where 97% can say, no, we're not going to do that.
Gary, thanks for raising the point, and a good point here, Steve.
I'm afraid he's exactly right. I think our own prosperity in many respects is an enemy. We have such an abundance of everything, and the material wealth that we have enjoyed in this country for so long, and there's so many things to do and occupations to distract us from what's really important. Sometimes I think a little adversity is really the best medicine, and we're experiencing that, as hard as it is, but hopefully it will turn us back to where we need to be.
Becky, you're next in Viroqua. You're on the air.
Yes, hi, and God bless you for your topic, and keep up His good work and keep telling the truth, because that's the only thing that will save not just this country, but our world and our nation and ourselves. And that's the thing with burying your head in the sand. You not only hide yourself to the truth, but you also hide yourself from evil. But the truth is stronger than evil if we believe that when Jesus said, what is truth? When he said, I am truth.
Yeah.
And that is the only way
you're right.
that we will know the truth, is if we know Jesus as Savior and Lord. And so we need to pray for these folks that are out there that are perpetuating this. And I am struck by the fact that the Bible does say that homosexuality and drunkenness and people who live that kind of lifestyle won't enter the kingdom of heaven. And there's other people that are listed in that group too. But the thing is, I don't know of any alcoholic who has fought to have a bathroom in a public place just because he feels like going into a public bathroom drunk.
Becky, thank you. I'm out of time here, and you're right. And it is a relationship. It's more than just moral living. It's a relationship with Jesus Christ that will make a difference. The number to target, folks, again, is 1-800-440-0680, 1-800-440-0680, or 612-304-6073. Steve Crampton with us today from Liberty Counsel. Steve, a closing thought you'd like to share with our listeners.
Listen, let me just say this. I think the content of the listeners' comments in particular, Jim, as well as your encouragement to take action, have really been a great blessing and encouragement to me. There is hope for this nation. God has given us another day, but it is up to us, isn't it, to take action and to seek His face and turn this nation around. It won't be by force. It will be by God's intervention for us.
God bless you, Steve. Thanks so much for being with us today from Liberty Counsel.
Thank you, Jim. God bless you.
The website is lc.org. That's for Liberty Counsel. You can also contact them at 800-671-1776. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the Internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.